This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's Friday. Welcome to Real Talk. Thanks for making time for us on this January 20th. John Hicks riding shotgun today, and it's official, John. We will no longer be wishing anybody a Happy New Year after Real Talkers have spoken. We ran this unscientific, unofficial Twitter poll. It just wrapped up a few moments ago, and with the 927 of you that chimed in on here, 68%, 7 out of 10 have let us know it's time to move on.
All right.
It's time to stop wishing people a Happy New Year. So we shall blaze forward into 2023. 3 weeks in, optimistic that this is going to be an unbelievable year with regards to the conversations we're going to have on this show and the progress that we're going to make in making sense of issues. Trash Talk's coming up a little bit later on today, and there's some great topical political commentary in there. These are real emails sent in to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Our Real Talk Roundtable, farming and food, on the heels of our conversation with the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois, earlier this week. One of our panelists reached out to me, and he was a little unhappy with what he heard from the food professor. And so we're going to have some clap back here. It's going to be a great, we've got a grain farmer, we've got a dairy farmer, and we've got a journalist from Canada's National Observer, Marc Fawcett-Atkinson, who's going to join us as well. He writes about food trends. He writes about what's happening in agriculture and what's happening in the food scene across the country. This is stuff everybody cares about for obvious reasons.
I can't wait to see the three of them. I'm going to wish them all a Happy New Year.
Yeah, you're going to wish them all a Happy New Year behind the scenes, which is perfect. And then, of course, Supriya Dwivedi, joins us every Friday, and we're really looking forward to this. Is Supriya in the bullpen right now?
She's
ready
not here
to go?
yet.
She's not here yet. Okay, so we've got a couple of things to get to. I'm curious to ask her about the Ivan Provorov situation in Philadelphia, because I know that I don't want this to be beating a dead horse, but I do think that there have been developments in the story. Philadelphia coach John Tortorella made comments just yesterday, I think it was, sort of in follow-up. I know that you've been rolling your eyes so hard you look like you're going to get a migraine.
Well, and man, I've always kind of liked Torts because he's that old school, grumpy, grandpa next door kind of guy. But
would you like to play for him?
Probably not. But sometimes, especially with this, I don't think he needed to double down on this. And some of his comments yesterday saying he respected his decision. I'm just wondering if you omit Pride Night and put in a night to honor the Black community or Indigenous culture, if he would be saying these things. So we'll look at the video and you guys decide.
Sure. I will say this. I mean, I put out what I knew would be probably a tweet that would get a little bit of attention, but not like it has, in the sense I said I think the Flyers should have benched him. I think he should have sat in the press box that game. And the replies are filthy. They're nasty. I got to the point, I very rarely do this. I actually, you can mute the conversation on your own tweet. I was like, I'm done receiving notifications on this. I'm just going to move on, because it's just, it really is. I appreciate some of the thoughtful notes that we've got from people on things like religious freedoms, on things like, people talk about acceptance has to be a two-way street and this, that, and the other. But
and religious freedom is all good. But another thing I saw last night, I got a notification. I opened up my Twitter at about 1 a.m. and a certain sportscaster said, the Philadelphia Flyers website now sold out of Ivan
Provorov jerseys.
Provorov jerseys. You can't get anything but extra small and a small now. So this just shows you people are divided.
Still people are divided
in 2023.
Yeah,
this is still. I can't believe it.
Well, I can believe it, and it's interesting. I think when we have an opportunity like this, that the story is about more than Ivan Provorov. The story is about more than hockey. The story is about our conversation about beliefs that people hold, and I think even just the angles of looking this as it was a team initiative. It's a league-wide initiative. What does it mean to be a team player? You can explore this from a number of different angles, and I'm looking forward to talking to Supriya about that. Plus, our pal Mo Amir was on yesterday. If you missed it, the host of This Is Van Color on Check. Just love Mo's take on things. He's just buddy good mood, hey? He just rolls in with a big smile on his face. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Sean Kanungo, who came in on our last show of 2022. But Mo tweeting, and I wanted to ask you about this as well. A lot of people have been ripping Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet Singh's watch. His watch comes up every once in a while. People talk about it. Well, Mo's pointed out on a tweet today,
wasn't wearing
with so much much focus on what Jagmeet wears on his wrist. Here's Prime Minister Trudeau's watch. It's called an IWC. It's a Portuguese regulateur, and the retail price is about $15K. And so he has a picture there of the PM rocking that watch, and he's got a nice close-up. It's a nice watch. It's a nice timepiece.
Yeah.
Does something like that rub you the wrong way? A politician, in particular, does Jagmeet Singh, is there an unfair standard for him where he's talking about the middle class and the people that want to join the middle class? That's actually more of a Trudeauism. But Jagmeet Singh, people look to the NDP as those that will advocate for the more marginalized, that will advocate for more equality, that will look to bring in things like a wealth tax, that would look to get a pharmacare bill passed. We'll talk to Supriya about that. Is the message lost if the person delivering the message is wearing a watch that's worth $10,000, $20,000, $30,000?
It is a bit. And Jagmeet's a little bit polarizing for me. I agree with him on some things, vehemently disagree on other things. But I noticed he put out a tweet yesterday talking about inflation, and the watch is now gone. So obviously some PR people got inside him. I also just want to mention this, RIP just this morning, David Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Yeah.
Passing away at the age of 81 there.
David Crosby and Jeff Beck in the same week.
Yeah, it's
right?
crazy.
That's, two guitar greats have passed. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and let's not forget Neil Young that rocked out with them for a little bit. Can you imagine being on the road with those guys back in the day? Amazing.
I always YouTube their live concerts and shows. They're absolutely incredible. So RIP there.
I love it. We've got an email here. It doesn't. It's from Jerry, and it doesn't qualify as a trash talk. And so I wanted to get it in on the show before we talk to Supriya. She's coming up in just a second. Jerry wrote in and just said, basically, when we start things with, quote, we have a complex relationship, that should immediately prompt us to pause and reflect and accept that whatever this thing is, it's going to require some nuance. He says, like my or anyone's relationship with health. He says, I love that your conversation with Ashley earlier this week, Ashley Wanamaker, the registered psychologist, he said, and Johnny jumping in there, drove home the holistic approach to our health and how it has to include work health and emotional health and physical health and relationship. It's all one thing, he says. But over the last week-ish of the show, some of the conversations, he says, with absolute legend regulars like Supriya and Charles, he says a lot of the conversations have circled around Jordan Peterson, polarization, politics, Russia's war, professional accountability. He says it may be obvious to some that these things are all related, but something hit me like an aha moment the other day, says Jerry. It says we're living in a fascinating time, and sometimes that's not the best, it seems, for humanity. But it can expose weakness in various ways. The theme of the last few years of civilization seems to be polarization, which has given way to more mainstream extremism. He says Adler's highlighted this on the show, right? As extremism operating on either end of the political spectrum, it's wild to watch it play out. He says we have autocracies and oligarchs and dictators. They hold people hostage, keep them uninformed. They stifle the free press. They use fear and violence as tools on civilians. But here's the key difference. In these last few years, the extremism seen in democratic countries has allowed that fear to turn to violence. He says, just look under the United States, under the guise of so-called free speech. Powerful people are inciting violence against others, even starting a coup, he says. And then there's the College of Psychologists in Ontario versus Jordan Peterson. He says this whole sort of sticks and stones adage has never been true. He says words have always hurt people. I understand why we need free speech, the ability to criticize those in power, combined with decentralized governance, regional autonomy, holding individual freedoms in place. But how do we walk a fine line, and who does it best in a democracy? He takes a look. He says, we know it's not the United States. He says, Canada's own history, many layers there. It'd be great to outline or continue this discussion of extremism in democracies, to continue with more expert voices examining where this range of free speech and personal freedom operates best, where it provides the most opportunity, but also creates a stable foundation for the most vulnerable. Jerry, I love it. And that's, to us, an encouragement that we keep our focus, that we continue to develop and pursue these storylines. And we really appreciate when Real Talkers take a second to share their thoughts with the show. Why don't we fire that clip of John Tortorella? I want to ask Supriya where she's sitting on this story with Ivan Provorov opting out of warm-ups on the Flyers Pride Night. The coach was asked about it again yesterday, and here's what he had to say.
As I said, Provi did nothing wrong. Just because you don't agree with his decision doesn't mean he did anything wrong. He felt strongly with his beliefs, and he stayed with it. And this was discussed as prior up to. You asked me if I was going to bench him. Why would I bench him? Because of a decision he's making on his beliefs and religion? He just felt he didn't want to take warm-up. I respect him for his decision. I thought the team handled themselves well. I thought our whole organization handled themselves well. To this day, I still feel the same way about that flag. You shouldn't be protesting when the anthem's played and you're in front of that flag. That's about the men and women that are sacrificing their lives to give us our freedoms. That's what I look at. Provy knew he was going to have some blowback here. That's part of the business. That's part of what you go through. But I respect him as far as staying true to himself, as I said the other night. And I respect the organization, how they handle themselves here, because they went about their business, and I thought it was a great night.
That's John Tortorella, coach of the Philadelphia Flyers, as we welcome in our Friday regular, Supriya Dwivedi, of course, a wonderful friend of the show and co-host of the wildly popular Seriously podcast. Check it out at seriouslypod.com. Where do you stand? Do you have a strong opinion on the Ivan Provorov Philadelphia Flyers debacle? I mean, is it black and white? Is it nuanced?
Yeah,
Where are you at?
no, it's black and white. What are they doing right now? They're just digging their hole deeper and deeper. And the fact that he's doubling down on this shit, and comparing it to Kaepernick's kneeling during the anthem is just bullshit. That was about standing up for rights. This is literally about not recognizing rights. They're completely not only incongruous, but diametrically opposing things that are underlying the motivation here. And I just find, from a strategic comms perspective, always very interesting when these very, moneyed organizations with lots of resources are consistently doing the wrong thing when it comes to trying to manage the media and press on this. And if they were given a heads up, why wasn't the media given a heads up that this was going to happen? Everybody seemed to be taking a little bit of back from it, right?
Yeah,
and
the earliest tweets from some of the journalists were like, if what I'm hearing is true, Ivan Provorov will not be taking warm-ups. And that was 10 minutes before the warm-ups. Can you imagine the group text of the people coming from hockey ops to PR for the Flyers? And it would be like, Provy's not taking warm-up. And someone would be like, there would be the question mark in response. And then the other person would do the shrug emoji. And then, but then it would get serious. And they would realize very quickly that what did happen was going to happen, which was this becoming an international news story and largely overshadowing the whole point of Pride Night. But I do find a silver lining, and that is that it's forcing all of us to reconcile how we feel about it and actually have meaningful conversations about what inclusion looks like and when you should be forced to get on board with something and when you should not. Was Ivan Provorov a bad teammate for not warming up with his or
yes?
Or I mean, I do think that it is. The answer is yes, but also, I mean, is there room in your mind to consider the idea of his strong religious conviction and opting out and how that applies to, I mean, this is a workplace. It's a workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if claiming religion as a reason to be not inclusive or to not recognize something is a good, valid reason. And this is where I think, you can, if you wanted to sit out, you can sit out, but then you bench him for sitting out. And the fact that they didn't do that, and the fact that, they had no consequences whatsoever, I think is more of a signal to what is important to that organization. And it's not the LGBTQ community. And let's, call it for what it is right now. Both in Canada and in the States, the LGBTQ community, particularly that T, the trans community, is under attack. And the fact that everyone who, claims to be an ally or just a decent fucking person needs to be standing with them right now. It's incredibly terrifying seeing what's happening, particularly in the States, but that's because they have more access to guns. So, right, the probability of violence there is probably a little bit higher than it is here, obviously, in that respect. But it's still scary seeing bigots come out in droves just to protest things like drag story time. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And when you are choosing to equivocate here, as we saw in that clip, it gives a license for people to be more hateful.
Well, one of the reasons why I think that Tortorella's got to touch on the American flag and Colin Kaepernick is because he is in a situation that it's incongruous. He said, he is on the record.
Yeah.
What was it, 3 years ago, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years ago, saying he would bench players, he would sit them if they demonstrated or protested during the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. So he has taken a position that is different from this one. And so
what's different between Colin Kaepernick and this guy? Can you tell me? I don't know.
Between Kaepernick and Provorov?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Kaepernick's on the right side and Provorov's on the wrong one. I mean, that's the biggest difference.
Facetious. I was being facetious.
Oh, pardon me.
Yes,
well, I'm glad I came up with a good answer. Jeez.
Yeah.
Hey, do you care about Jagmeet Singh's watch? Do you care about Justin Trudeau's watch at all?
Yeah, although, if we're being honest, both of those men wear timepieces. They don't wear watches.
Oh, school me. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How do you know? Is it once it's more than $1,000, it's a timepiece?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's the cutoff. Yeah, I would say 1,500 maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, that is. It's like guys that call cigars sticks. It's like they do. They call their watches pieces, don't they? Check out this piece. Yeah, but is it okay for Jagmeet Singh to be talking about? Like, I'm going to be honest. I don't have a problem with the watch. I've never voted federal NDP and whatever. I wouldn't vote for Jagmeet Singh. That's fine. But I like him as a guy. He seems to be kind of actually a captivating and somewhat cool dude. He's the face of the party. Obviously, you want to see some synergy with how someone conducts himself. I think if he was driving around in a Benz Maybach, it would probably look bad. But at the same time, like, I've always sort of thought devil's advocate. Maybe someone gifted him the watch. Maybe he saved up for 10 years to buy the watch. Maybe it's a knockoff. Like, is he still allowed to talk about eradicating poverty if he's wearing a $20,000 watch?
Was it $20,000?
No, I don't know how much it is. I'm just arbitrary. Like, watches. What nice watches. Last night I was talking to my buddy. He's shopping for a Breitling. I said, "What's a Breitling go for?" He goes, "Yeah, you can get a nice one for like $6,000. I know that the Rolex watches are like 15, 20. A lot of people are buying Rolexes. So they say the Prime Minister's, Mo Amir pointed this out in a fun tweet this morning. The PM's watch, an IWC Portuguese Regulateur, apparently is about $15,000. Justin Trudeau's watch.
I mean, look, I'd like nice watches. I particularly like nice watches on men. And
really?
So I'm pro watch, man. I don't know. I like to your point, why can't you care about two things? Why can't dude, want to look good, and then at the same time also care about eradicating poverty? It's a very silly kind of gotcha. I mean, I get that we're in a very silly timeline and social media tends to bring out said silliness, but I don't know. It just seems like the wrong sort of thing to focus on, but clearly his team took it to heart because in another video that was posted after a lot of the criticism about the watch, right? He's not wearing it. So somebody was listening.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think you can care about two things at once. I saw somebody tweeting that maybe Jagmeet Singh should donate it, sell his watch and donate the money to the food bank. And I'm just like, okay.
Get out of here. Okay.
Right.
Let the guy have a watch. He also wears nice suits, okay?
Yeah. Like he's the face of the party.
His wife's in fashion.
Like what's he supposed to? You want to show up in like tattered burlap? He's like showing up to the House of Commons in old coffee bags. Like, is that what people are looking for? He's got like the Connor McDavid socks on with like sandals that he's been wearing for 30 years. He does say, Jagmeet Singh, that the Liberals better approve a national pharmacare plan this year. He says that'll be a deal breaker if it's not done. And we all know what happens to Justin Trudeau's minority government without NDP support. What are you making of the story? For people listening on the podcast, you got a bit of a demure smirk on your face right now.
I do, and I think I did an eye roll there. That was visceral. I didn't even. It was an automatic reaction. Yeah, look, I think he needs to shit or get off the pot. Like, I get what he's saying here in terms of, and it was one of their main asks, if you will, from this deal. But he seems to, in recent, weeks, I guess, have upped the sort of rhetoric about calling out the government. I mean, he recently said that the Liberal government was like waging a full-fledged attack on like working class people. And it's like, well, if you actually believe that, then I don't know. And then you probably shouldn't be in bed with them trying to get stuff passed. But then, of course, you do have to take into consideration this is partisan politics and so much of it is theater. And so I think this is more theater. I would be very curious to see, what progress is made, because I think pharmacare is important, right? I think it's kind of silly to say that we have like a publicly accessible or universally accessible healthcare system that doesn't include drugs and dental and vision. But I guess I wait with bated breath to see what Jagmeet Singh actually does, because you need the provinces to play ball.
I was just going to say,
if you're going to get the pharmacare stuff, so it's
Yeah.
not all on the federal government, right?
Yeah, and like I'll give you an example. I mean, well, we have Jason Kenney on the record. Obviously, he's not the premier anymore, but so I'll look forward to hearing what Danielle Smith has to say about this. But Jason Kenney wanted nothing to do with the national pharmacare plan, so it can't be assumed that it's going to pass and be a grand success. It would be, to state the obvious, a huge deal for millions of Canadians. I mean, it'd be a really big deal, and it'd be very expensive too.
It would. But it would be a very big deal. And I think for folks that do have drug coverage through work, they tend to forget that, right? That if you don't have any coverage, it can be absolutely bank account draining to pay for your drugs.
I hear some people talk. I mean, I saw one lady tweeting about it. She was tweeting her gratitude, but it's like gratitude, I guess. You realize though her husband has ALS, and she said that this prescription regimen that he's on right now would cost them $500,000 a year. $500,000 a year if they were left to pick up the tab on their own. She says, obviously, we wouldn't be able to swing that. I mean, who could? Maybe Ivan Provorov with the Flyers could swing at $500,000 a year. But anyway, it just is a perspective check for me, let alone all the people that even if it's $200-$300 a month, that's a ton of dough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
How significant is Jacinda Ardern stepping down as New Zealand's prime minister? What a very were you shocked?
Yeah, I think everyone sort of was, right? And
Yeah.
look, I don't pretend to be an expert in the domestic affairs of
Sure.
New Zealand. I don't think you do either, right? We get a very filtered version that what gets put into international coverage of her. But I think she's just such a like an icon, a figurehead for women everywhere. I think she demonstrated, particularly in the aftermath of the Christchurch attack, what real empathetic leadership sort of looks like. And it was a nice stark contrast to the bullshit response our country had to the mosque attack in Quebec City. So that really stuck with me. And I think something that we can't really separate is the fact that, the Ardern got a lot of sexist abuse thrown her way, and she was subject to a lot of, bullshit misogyny. And she hasn't said this herself, and so I'll put the same equivocation that Michelle Rempel Garner put in her Substack piece on this. I'm hesitant to put that as like a reason, much in the same way Michelle was.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can separate the two. And before people start going, well, men get it too. Yes, of course, men get it too. I'm not discounting that men get it too. Trudeau and Mr. Singh probably get a lot of shit thrown their way, right? But the shit that women get online, right, is qualitatively different. And my old co-host Matt Gurney used to point this out all the time. And when I left, he pointed this out quite forcefully. Is that when he would get hate mail, it would be like, Gurney, you suck. Mm-hmm. And when I would get hate mail, it's like, fuck you, you dirty packy cunt. You need a good raping to be put in your place, and I'm gonna come in your mouth, right? Like those are two very different fucking pieces of hate mail.
Yeah.
And they affect you differently.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the sort of thing that we need to recognize. And people don't have to take my word for it. There's a paper out by Heidi Torek and Chris Tanev at UBC, and they looked at online incivility that was directed at political candidates in 2019, and it's an interesting read to see what they found.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Sorry, that was a lot. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I'm just like, let it flow. I mean, you're speaking truth, and I just it's bad faith. It's a bad faith argument, like that men get it too. Sure, I mean, I've had my fair share of abuse, and we're like, relatively small fish. I mean, you're going to look at like the real public figures. We're talking like global leaders here. I mean, obviously, yeah, there's a lot directed at Trudeau, for example. I mean, there's a whole market in Canada. Like, I'd be curious to see what annual revenue would be on "Fuck Trudeau" bumper stickers. Like a lot. They hang him in effigy. They burn 100%. Like RCMP and CSIS, I'm sure have investigated. I mean, they laid charges after the Ottawa occupation related to threats of violence against the Prime Minister. They've had the property compromised. They've had yes, it does happen, but it's not even close. It's not even close. And anybody that argues that it is, I almost don't have time for it because it's so obviously disingenuous. It's so obviously different. The experience that men and women face in media, in politics, in the workplace. And whatever. Here I am, a man explaining the women's experience in the workplace.
It's all good.
I'm just saying, I think that men need to have a voice in the conversation as well to other men that are arguing that dudes get it too, because it's not the same, and you know it.
Yeah, and look, again, I'm going to call out Michelle Rumpel-Garner's Substack on post on this. I mean, she noted that the shit that Trudeau gets, yes, it's very in quantity, it's a lot, but the stuff that Ardern would get was, it's a lot more sexualized too. And we're speaking of Trudeau, and he's actually a pretty interesting case study because of the way that right-wingers have painted him as this effeminate soy boy Nancy that just has nice hair and is pretty and no other qualities, he effectively gets treated, a lot of the shit that gets thrown at him is effectively what a female politician would get, interestingly enough. And, I talked about Mr. Singh. I think we need to also point out that if you're a man who's also brown, you're going to get a lot of racist shit too, right? So yes, they do get it. But it's different. And if we're not going to acknowledge it's different, then to your point, I don't even know how to start that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I saw that Jordan Peterson yesterday was tweeting that he was thrilled to see Prime Minister Ardern sit down and stand down or whatever. What am I trying to say? Step away, step down, whatever.
Step down. Resign.
Thank you for I need basic English help every once in a while. Anyway, Jordan Peterson says 1 down, 1 to go. Trudeau must go. Of course, the whole idea around Jordan Peterson, College of Psychologists of Ontario, that story continues. Meantime, the College of Surgeons and Physicians of Ontario. This from Ashley Stewart, who joined us on the show earlier this week. By the way, Supriya, she was talking about some of the abuse that she's faced from renegade Canadian doctors. They're peddling these COVID vaccine conspiracy theories. It was a fascinating interview. Real Talkers, if you missed Ashley Stewart on the show, make sure you listen to that interview. But this is wild, hey? This college in Ontario, obviously the regulatory body for surgeons and physicians, detailing threats behind barring the public from their buildings.
It is. And what I find the kicker to all this, or the real nugget here, is the fact that the college themselves is saying it's the uptick in all of this is due to the proliferation of disinformation on social media, and that is being, wildly spread. And it's I don't know, we're gonna have to fucking figure out a way to deal with this, because this is untenable. You can't have, people shooting up the College of Physicians and Surgeons. They've said they've had the door shot at, fecal matter. You put up Ashley's tweet there. It has the gist.
Yeah, fecal matter hung on the front door of the building. Buildings shot at, windows broken, graphic death threats, and calls for violence against staff. To paint a picture, and like you just reiterated, they say that disinformation is to blame. First of all, if you're at the point in your life when you're shitting in a bag, driving it somewhere, I mean, I'm assuming you're not shitting in the parking lot of the building. Maybe you are. Maybe you went in the building. No, I think
it's the parking lot. I don't think you carry the shit with you. I think you...
So you shit in the parking lot. I get do you wipe? Do you just you get maybe one of those
great question.
Wet wipes so you can clean it up quick? And then
maybe
I guess
maybe you wipe and put that into the bag as well.
You put that into the bag, and then you walk up and then you hang that. If you're hanging that on the front door, if you're hanging your own steaming shit on the front door of the College of Surgeons and Physicians of Ontario, it may be time to evaluate where you are in your life.
Yeah, ask about your life choices.
Just take a moment of introspection and ask yourself, is this the type of person I'm proud to be? Supriya Dwivedi, we love you. Have an amazing weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Can't wait, buddy. Have a good weekend.
All right, pal, you got it. That's Supriya Dwivedi. You can check her out on Twitter at Supriya Dwivedi, obviously, and online, seriouslypod.com. Any insights, John, into people shitting in bags in parking lots?
Well, I mean, if you're going to go in, go all the way. Light it on fire, at least. Come on. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's right. The old dog shit trick, eh? The old dog shit on the doorstop. You have to wonder if that's ever contributed to a serious arson type situation.
Right.
The idea being you got to get the cranky old guy out at his door. He has to stomp out the fire and he gets dog shit on his slippers. Mm-hmm. But you have to wonder if someone ever actually unintentionally burned a house down and had to pay the price. I wonder. Tell us your story, Real Talkers.
Please don't.
Tell us your story. Coming up in just a second. There's no way to segue. Actually, there is. Speaking of shit on your boots, farming and food. Our Real Talk Roundtable coming up in just about 2 minutes' time. We're looking forward to it. These conversations do not happen without amazing sponsors like our friends at California Closets. I want you to check out their website, californiaclosets.ca. You know, as the name would suggest, obviously they've mastered the closet game. I can tell you firsthand experience. A custom closet from California Closets is an absolute game changer. But workspaces, living areas, storage rooms, and the garage, they do it all with informed design that starts with a free consultation. Nothing to lose. See how California Closets can change the game for you like they did for us. Plus, they're hiring. You can find jobs and apply now at californiaclosets.ca. Our friends at Grand Dog Essentials Quality Raw Food want to remind you they've got a great resource on their website. It's the blog at granddog.ca. I was reading it just the other day. They've got a great feature on high-quality protein for dogs and cats. Don't let the name fool you. They've got quality raw food for cats, too. You got to know about protein, of course, when it comes to your pet's health and wellness, and some great tips on diet, plus problem solving. Things like, old age manifesting itself in joint pain. What can you do for your beloved furry four-legged family member? Find out more today at granddog.ca. The promo code REALTALK gets you 10% off your first-time order delivered directly to your door. Is 2023 going to be a year of change for you? Are you going to ramp things up with regards to maybe the direction your career is taking, or maybe your personal knowledge about a subject that you find to be fascinating? Why not start that journey today online at athabascau.ca? Literally tens of thousands of Canadians across the country, and for that matter, around the world, take advantage of Athabasca University's world-class accredited online programs and courses. You talk to anybody that's been there, like Harmon Candola. He was saying the other week when he was here on the Friday Roundtable, his wife just finished her graduate degree in psychology. A huge shout out to her. She needed to take some time off to be at home. The family matters were demanding her attention. She didn't fall behind because you learn at your own pace. You have the flexibility to develop a schedule that suits your lifestyle at Canada's Open University. That's athabascau.ca. And of course, every Monday on the show, we focus on the positives. We find the silver linings with positive reflections presented by our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. It's a great time to start looking into solar energy solutions to power your life. Kubi Energy is a full-service contractor for residential and commercial solar power systems. It all starts with a free quote today, and we could be talking about houses, we could be talking about warehouses, hell, we could be talking about dairy barns. Solar panels are more versatile, reliable, and affordable now than ever before. Get your free quote today by visiting kubienergy.ca. Our guest today on the Real Talk Roundtable, this is presented by our friends at Urban Timber, know a thing or two about food. And I'm looking forward to this next half hour as we learn from three individuals that walk the walk. Two of them are actively working in farming as we speak. The other is a national reporter for food systems and the environment. It's the Farm and Food Real Talk Roundtable presented by our friends at Urban Timber. As we say hello to Jeff Nonay from Lakeside Dairy, Steele Perrett from Perrett Farms and Lakeside Dairy, and Marc Fawcett-Atkinson, who, as mentioned, is the Food Systems and Environment Reporter for Canada's National Observer based out of Vancouver, BC. To the three of you, thanks so much for making time for us this morning. It's nice to see your faces. I want to encourage you to treat this like we're out for beers or coffees. Jump in on each other. Let's have a candid conversation about the state of food, farming, agriculture, supply and demand, maybe supply management today. Jeff, you reached out to the show. You've always been a great friend of the show after we had Sylvain Charlebois on just a couple of days ago. And your text to me, I don't think you'll mind me sharing with the audience, just said, Sylvain, really? What problem did you have with the food, Professor?
Well, Sylvain is Sylvain. He's been around for, kind of building his name and the go-to. I mean, the article that you guys referenced, he's the main media go-to person to speak on behalf of food, which I don't have so much of a problem with, but it doesn't take a lot of, a long time of listening to what he has to say to hear a lot of misdirection and, maybe just trying to keep the message simple and not dig into what happens at the producer level, despite his kind of affinity to take jabs at it without anyone there to kind of counter that message. So yeah, not the first time I've sent that type of a message to you or somewhere else where he happens to be getting some airtime and a little bit of free reign.
Steele, did you have a hot take on that? Before I want to ask you about affordability, I want to talk to you about food prices, and then Marc, we're going to get to your take on this as well. But is there anything particular to consider about the message that Dr. Charlebois has and the platform that he has across Canada, obviously including this show?
Well, I think to start with, when he talks about farming and made it basically sound like dairy farmers are running away like bandits with all this money, he has to look at the cost of production. And I mean, it doesn't take a very deep look to see that the cost of production has gone up roughly 50% for the dairy farmers. So 11% increase on your product to sell, and your cost of production has gone up 50% actually isn't a very good ratio.
Steele, you've written, contributed to the Western Producer, including this piece at producer.com. People can read it. I was taking a look earlier today. You had your focus on sort of the cash crunch and some of the barriers that farmers are facing. This one here, asset poor farmers face cash hurdles. This was Jeremy Syme's follow-up to your feature. Again, people can find it all. It's been good reporting and solid conversation, putting issues in front of Canadians for consideration. When we talk about the costs of production, for example, what does the average Canadian probably not realize about what it takes to do business and feed the country?
Oh, I think there's probably a lot that they don't realize. I think the biggest thing, and what that article refers to, though, is more about how farming is basically run by the same generational farms, and new people who try and get in are facing a lot of hurdles, right? Mostly on the financial side of it. Whereas established farms that have lots of equity behind them get far better interest rates, far better loans, a lot more free will as far as what they can financially do. Whereas anyone trying to start out in the industry is really handcuffed by the industry itself. So as much as FCC loves to talk about, starting new farmers and all this help they're giving them, really the only help they're giving them is trying to buy land, and buying land is not a helpful thing for a young farmer, mostly because buying land is not even a good investment for a farm. It's a great investment for a farm owner, but as far as the cash structure of a farm, it takes a lot of other land to pay for one piece of land. So as far as starting out, trying to grow a business, your first thing that you're going to be buying, it's not going to be a piece of land. So it's not very much help.
You had an interesting background. You a degree in civil engineering, right? And you started your farm as a relatively young guy. Was that something that you had always dreamed of doing?
Yeah, so I went to school, got a civil engineering diploma, did that for a while, but really missed farming. So I had, grown up working on a farm. He had a lot of health problems, so I really got to dive into the management of a farm at a real young age, talking like 16 years old, and basically being in charge of field operations. So, really got hooked on that, and then decided that after I did civil engineering for a while that I wanted to try and get out there and start a farm, and it looked like something that was possible. And then as I started to get into it, and you farm kind of like you've been taught to farm, and you do this, you also realize the economics of this are totally bizarre and aren't really possible. And it really shows that farmers are farming the equity that they have previously to create cash flow. So I had to come up with, some new ways of farming, new techniques, new agronomic styles, and started to put that to work and really started to get traction and grow this thing out, and grew that farm from literally 0 acres to 6,000 acres plus doing custom work, and couldn't get the financing to keep it going when we ran into 5 years in a row of agricultural disasters, and could prove to banks and whatnot that we were losing less money than the neighbor but didn't have the equity to back it up. So I had to shut that down, and then was lucky enough to run into Jeff, and him being forward thinking and seeing what I was doing, he was on board with that, and, been able to come here. And then this has really created a whole new set of opportunities, because Jeff doesn't operate with crop insurance, which just opens up the world to a grain farmer. So now I can do all the things that I really wanted to be doing, but was handcuffed because I had to have crop insurance to have any sort of funding from anyone. And, now we're pushing the envelope. We're figuring out new ways to do things, trying to figure out how to create cash flow and create profits even when the weather's against you. And, I think we have the results behind us to show that it can be done. But yet when you go and look and talk to neighbors and whatnot, they're not interested in doing something different. And that rolls right into the carbon tax stuff right now. We have farmers who are really angry about carbon tax, and yet that could be the biggest opportunity for agricultural, for sure in my generation, as far as it's a whole new market that we could be a part of. And yet all we're doing is fighting it and being angry about it. And I sure hope that our lobbyists are not really listening to what farmers are saying and are out there looking for the best deal and not just trying to get us exempt from a carbon tax.
Okay, listen, I'm scribbling notes as you're talking, and we've got a ton to address. Operating without crop insurance, the carbon tax as an opportunity. That's going to be the headline. That's going to be the headline when we post this stuff. But I haven't even said hello to Marc yet. And so, Marc, I want to loop you in. You come at this from a different angle. You're a national reporter following food systems. When you take a look, we're talking about grocery prices. We're talking about supply chain issues over the past couple of years. Obviously, we're hearing guys that are literally the boots on the ground here talk about the challenges that farmers are facing. What's your assessment of the health of Canada's food system right now?
Oh, God. It's a big question.
Yeah.
I think and COVID to some degree showed there is a certain resilience to it. We still had food through all of this. I definitely think there's a need to increase that, particularly in light of climate change. We're still very reliant on the States and imports, which particularly on the produce side, there just isn't the water to sustain that. So we need to figure out some way to bring that home. And then kind of in the broader sense, I think we've designed a system that's on the agricultural side, with the exception of supply managed crops like dairy, like eggs, like poultry, a system that's really geared towards export primarily, instead of focused more on how do we meet domestic needs across the board of the types of food that we need. So I think we need a shift there, and then also just like looking at efficiencies system wide. So if you look at food waste, we waste around half the food that we have in Canada. And that comes from everywhere. Some of that, a little bit of that actually is from the farm. Some of it's kind of in the processing, some of it's in the transport, some of it's in the restaurant, some of it's in the groceries, some of it's like people having leftover food in the back of their fridge. So that's kind of a huge area that if we can kind of make that chain significantly more efficient, just there we're gaining a lot of food that we're wasting right now, and saving also kind of on the climate side and the environmental side. We're using less resources, we're emitting less, both in terms of the production side of that food and when it goes into the landfill, if it's not composted, essentially it'll become methane and kind of contribute to our methane problem. And then there's also an issue in terms of ownership, of who has the market power in the food system to control both food prices and prices that producers are getting paid. Because I do talk to farmers quite often, and the message that comes up a lot is, we're pinched, and there's so much power in the grocers and kind of in those intermediary suppliers that's quite a consolidated area. Producers have very little leeway to push against that. And like, I'm a big fan of supply management because it gives more negotiating power in that aspect, right?
I was hoping we were going to have a big fight here between the journalist and the dairy farmer. No.
I'm not.
Everyone's on the same page.
Everybody has his thoughts on supply management. I can't say I agree with them.
Well, hey, listen, let's circle back on supply management. We can. I also want to certainly include our audience. We've got such an engaged audience, and they're on the edge of their seats for this conversation. Like MA says that I come from a farming background. The only rich farmer I ever knew was a dead farmer, and the money came when everything was sold. Jeff, I'm curious to pick your brain. If you want to respond to that, please do. But do you agree with Steele? You don't hear, it's not been a common theme that farmers on the prairies are seeing the carbon tax as an opportunity. Let's go down that avenue. Do you agree with Steele?
You know what? There's a reason I suggested he comes on the show, right? We work well together as we're kind of, as I'm feeling my comfort zone. So I think generally there's a little bit of a background in agriculture where that thought process is there. You're seeing Dairy Farmers of Canada come out with, net zero by 2050, which is great. And the statement is put out there. The pressure is coming in a lot of these aspects on, the little bit more tighter run groups. So not even in supply management, in the horticultural side, same messaging. And that really piques my interest because we have no idea and no roadmap for how we're actually going to do that. So when Steele comes to the table and has these ideas and some practical things that work, and I can measure that up against what my agronomist that I've worked with for almost 2 decades is saying, and even see the shift in his mindset as he's digging into some conversations and researching what Steele's trying to achieve out here. And we're not talking he stepped into this operation and is using the same equipment in the same land, and we're growing the same crops. We're just doing it in a different way and kind of combining things differently. So it's not like a whole retooling of the farm, but it is extremely significant in the thought process. I think it's good to poke that bear and have farmers maybe get a little bit uncomfortable in their chairs and consider that carbon is an opportunity. You see it in the beef industry. They talk about their regenerative program in the grasslands and try to get that message across. The challenge is, from a management standpoint, is that there's a lot of competing voices on that, right? So the message gets across and you tell your story and you can scientifically back it up, but there's quickly maybe some unfounded presentations or half-truths out there, similar to what Sylvain kind of preaches, that undermine that forward thinking and that workload. And that's what really frustrates me about the interviews and the things that he does, whether it's how he talks about pricing or just not really trying to move everything forward in a positive way.
Spell it out for me, like for the average person that's not on the farm. Like, assume nothing. Spell it out like you're talking to a class of grade sixers. What is he saying about pricing and the cost at the grocery store that is inaccurate or misleading?
Where the pricing comes from. So he's quick to defend the retailer and say, listen, their costs have gone up and therefore it's justifiable. But we know that their reporting tells us that they're making record profits. That's not true across the spectrum of all the agricultural sectors. And he likes to pick on dairy and the animal agriculture sector. He's, maybe a little bit less to say about beef because it's free enterprising. But when Steele comments, like, I sent you a few graphs and just what we're up against through COVID and with the war in the Ukraine and uncertainty and the global warming, ironically, or the shift in climate that's causing, even right now, droughts in the mid plains of the US are still there. They've backed off a bit, but you're seeing grain prices. So your wheat, canola, soybeans, barley prices have all been somewhere between 80 to 120% increase since 2020. And that movement into, that bottom line for us is immediate as a dairy farm. And as Steele pointed out, we had an 11% increase. Like, it did not cover our cost of production. And that's just on the feed side of things. At the same time, we are seeing increased carbon tax. We are seeing other increased costs all around all of it.
Well, I see.
And then,
sorry.
And the way it rolls out. So there is some lack of transparency on that retail end, and retail does what they do. So I remember last year when we announced the increase, it was announced in September of 2021, and it kind of didn't hit the radar because dairy does their cost study and it announces that increase is coming. The increase actually hits in February, but the retailers decided to move the price up immediately on that news. And then it's just this confusion and conflation. When Sylvain talks about, I guess let's stick to dairy specifically. He's right. The Canadian Dairy Commission is a very confusing mechanism. It's not confusing how we get our price increases on the dairy farm. So the price increases on the dairy farm come from our cost of production increase. 50% of the adjustment comes from standardized studies done at every provincial level on what our cost of production does in that calendar year. And the other 50% is based on the consumer price index, which has nothing to do with dairy in just a marketplace.
So it's not arbitrary is what you're saying. You're not deciding that you want to take, your kids to Disneyland and so you're cranking up your prices 15%.
It is so mechanical. It's back of the napkin math, and it's surprising when he tries to conflate it as anything else. And maybe he's a little bit confused because when we talk about how we sell our milk to processors, he's absolutely correct. It is bizarre. It makes no sense. The gap in pricing that we receive from a processor based on the product that they are making blows my mind. And I guess my insight on that as a dairy farm is that I also run a processing plant. And often if I want to know how much I'm going to get charged for milk, if I want to make butter, the easiest way for me to figure that out is to make some butter, report it, and see what the CDC decides to charge me for that milk.
Steele, before, I don't want to move on from this carbon taxes opportunity thing because I think that this is really interesting. It's really fascinating. But what would you say to the cynical farmer that's been doing it their way for 40 years, and you guys are out there having a coffee, and he says, "I heard you on Real Talk," or "I heard the scuttlebutt." What the hell are you talking about? This is an opportunity. He's going to say my costs are up, and he's going to show you his bill, his utility bill for the farm for the month, and he's going to say, "You tell me how this is opportunity." What would you say to him?
I would say to start thinking differently. Too many farmers out there are still playing checkers, and farming is a game of chess. I think when you look at bills, I think this last year was a perfect example. The definition of no-till in Alberta is basically an amount of tillage, whereas you can literally go to no-till other than seeding. So everywhere you drive this fall, you'd see people out harrowing and dust blowing away before you could ever see the tractor, and they're burning fuel, they're letting their carbon blow away, all these things. And we can prove that you don't need to do that. So to start with, I would say, let's start looking at your operation and let's start cutting some costs and using agronomics to help us do that. The next thing I would say is, why wouldn't we want to be a part of the newest market out there and something that we're going to have to deal with no matter what? So let's not complain about it. Let's get some rules out there so everyone knows what you need to do, which is really what we're lacking right now. There is nothing out there to say how we can be a part of the carbon market at the Canadian level. We can be a part of the carbon market at the voluntary level, but the voluntary level really, I don't know, it's undervalued, and the research behind it sometimes is a little bit iffy. There's a lot of backlash around it. There's some sketchy projects out there. So really what we want to be a part of is the Canadian carbon tax market, put out some rules out there, and then let farmers innovate, figure out ways to do it, and let's be a part of it so we can actually create value from it instead of just complaining and trying to avoid a small tax instead of being a part of this huge economy and market.
So you have two schools of thought, Ryan, on that. And what Steele's suggesting is an actual measurement-based program. So we want to measure the results. And historically in agriculture, what we've done is it's just simpler for the government to adopt and say, if you sign here and say that you own zero-till equipment and you use this process, then we're going to give you some carbon credits. That was the first kick at the can. And it was a good movement because it reduced tillage and it had farmers starting to move that direction. But it wasn't accurate because it was based on, a massive aggregate pile and the reliance of, if you do something a certain way, you'll get a result, not actually measuring what that result was.
This is, I want to give a shout out as well to our great friends at Edify. A feature just about a year ago, about 13 months ago, on the two of you, reads the headline, "The New Normal. From flooded fields to devastating droughts, the only thing Alberta farmers can predict is the unpredictable climate." It's a great feature on some of the innovation happening on the farm. People can read it. It's from the December 2021 edition, the issue of Edify Edmonton at edifyedmonton.com. Marc, I would love to pick your brain on this. Like, when we talk about climate, when we talk about climate action, we're talking about the carbon tax. Obviously, there's been a lot of, I think, disdain for, I hear it loudly from producers around the Prime Minister's what's being described as a fertilizer ban. I've seen the assertion this week that the federal incentive to cut fertilizer use by about 30% has not been based, argue some producers, has not been based on appropriate science. They're arguing that it's somewhat arbitrary. What are some of the storylines in the context of climate? You're an environment reporter as well. What are you noticing about the state of programs, the progress? Steele talks about innovation. What are some of the stories you're keeping an eye on in this context?
I definitely think there's And honestly, it's been really cool to hear about what the two of you are doing. And I'd be curious to talk a bit more later.
You should.
Because yeah, no, there's a lot. I've noticed kind of to some degree at the grassroots level, there's a lot of similar initiatives. A lot of farmers kind of trying to rethink how they're approaching things. There's kind of a growing, both on the technological side and kind of there's some political interest towards carbon markets, and the technology is starting to become much more possible to actually monitor this, what's in the soil, because each field is going to be different, and what you can sequester in each field is going to be different, and how the ownership structure and how you essentially guarantee that carbon's staying there is going to need to be kind of tailored to each farm, right? So I don't know. I think kind of to some degree there's an under the radar kind of grassroots push to shift, at least among some farmers, and there are, particularly on both the federal and the provincial side, there are programs out there to help that. One theme that I've noticed, and this comes up a lot with the fertilizer, the so-called fertilizer ban, which is not a ban, it was proposed as a voluntary reduction, is there's a lot of misinformation swirling. It's like I did a story about that actually, and you can kind of trace on social media the moment when there in early 2020 the federal government or 2021 the federal government announced that they were going to start crafting this program, and no one talked about it until July, when it got picked up by some right-wing conspiracy theorists and just blew up on social media, and then it became an issue, right? So it's been interesting to kind of track how these sustainability initiatives that initially don't necessarily have a ton of resistance will have, they can kind of out of nowhere, they can hit a bit of a wall, and trying to, it's been, it's a challenge that kind of exceeds simply the economics. It's also a political and to some degree a storytelling challenge, right?
Jeff,
whose story is best?
Sorry to step on your toes, Marc. Jeff, how is I mean, one thing I've known about you, and I feel like I didn't necessarily do justice. I did a quick intro because I wanted to get to the three of you and start the conversation. But one of the things that, Jeff, you and I have been friends, I guess, for about 10 years now, and you've told me stories about how you were using innovation like grinding up drywall offcuts and using those to fertilize crops, if I remember correctly. And I know that innovation has been driving you. Like, you actually you have made a name for yourself in your neck of the woods as someone who's not afraid to try new things. With regards to this voluntary fertilizer reduction and that whole story and the bigger picture of sustainability, what are some of the tangible things? What are some of the really cool things that you've been doing on your farm? And by the way, how has forgive me, Marc, the quote unquote fertilizer ban, how is it impacting you, if at all?
So on our farm, Steele will be able to speak to this a little bit more because he has to design and figure out where and how to use the fertilizer. I think it's important, the timing and what you do and what your goals are. So overall, we fertilize to get the biggest possible crop, and that's why we use as much nitrogen as we do. And realistically, in dryland farming, or even with a good friend of mine that's extremely intense down in irrigation, growing a high value crop like potatoes, he's shifted to 100% away from front loading nitrogen and uses petiole testing and putting nitrogen on through the pivot as the crop needs it and shutting it off. So that's going to continue to have to be in the forefront. If we're overall going to grow a smaller crop, I don't necessarily see that there's no way out of that, but I also don't see that as being as big of a economic impact on the farm as some people think that it is. And that goes back to Steele, shifting the mindset to how do you most efficiently grow the crop with the profitability line in mind, rather than the gross dollars that you can generate. And that bumps up, maybe a little bit against land values and return on some of that asset. So it's complicated. Globally, I think we have to be very careful in agriculture, setting us up against the US if they don't have similar policies, and then we're set to compete head to head against them. What that looks like can be a little bit messy on the government side, but overall, I think that if that's the direction we have to go, then you look at the opportunities in it.
Okay, I'm going to ask Steele about fertilizer in just a second, but Jeff, let me ask you. I remember, back in my days as a TV news reporter, I remember heading out with the camera and talking to a fella who's basically, a hailstorm rolled through and demolished his canola. It was quite a sight to see, the power of nature. And I'll never forget him saying to me, he was explaining to me how some of his crops were insured and some of them weren't. And he said to me, he looked at me, and it was at the clip that we used in promoting the story that night on the news at 6. He said, this was a $2 million storm. And it just kind of painted a picture for the average city slicker that has no idea about these types of things. You roll without crop insurance. Is that just, you just like living on the edge, or are insurance premiums just got to the point where they're unaffordable? What's the logic, and how does that translate into the bigger strategy of how you farm?
I guess, first of all, the fortunate location of the farm and the really infrequent, severity of hail. So for me, looking at it, as I never really was able to have a crop failure and go, yeah, that actually protected me. I did buy crop insurance when I got into potatoes in the early 2000s. And, we went through that drought year, and I thought, good, I'm glad I have crop insurance, and get to the end of the year. And it's like, oh, I get $0 for that crop insurance. So, over the span of my 20 plus years farming, I certainly would say that I'm not behind because of it. Having said that, the last few years of really extreme weather, 2021 in particular, was devastating to not have crop insurance, from the amount of heat, some marketing, missteps that we've never seen before, as far as that June 40-degree weather that just absolutely shriveled up crops. So nervous about it for sure, because what the risks have changed. Hail and a little bit short of rainfall seems to be that risk parameter is still there, but the extreme heat and the length of time without any rain has me sitting a little bit on the edge of my seat as far as not having that crop insurance. And when you talk about subsidies in agriculture, half of the bill for crop insurance is covered by the government, generally speaking. So it is a subsidized program for grain farmers as well. It just doesn't seem to pencil out on the farm. And then it does lead to opportunities, like Steele said, on, they won't insure us for growing peas and canola together because they have no baseline for what that should look like. So it's really not even an option. And as we go down that path, and that's where we're at.
Steele, I've only known you for 30 minutes, but I think it's safe to say you've established yourself as a reasonable, informed optimist. You are in charge. You're Jeff's grain guy. So in the context of, the bigger conversation about climate and farming sustainability, and obviously farmers care about climate change because we've just heard from Jeff how it manifests itself and some of the problems it can create. How do you approach fertilizing crops? It's also your job to get the most yield possible. So how are you approaching this in ways that those of us that don't farm can understand?
Well, I think to start with, if you're running a farm as a business, your goal isn't the highest yield possible. It's the highest net profit.
Okay.
So that's the first place to look. But I think the other thing is the number one driver of yield in the world is water, not fertilizer. So if we want to have more sustainable yields year over year, then we need to do better with the water that we get, and we don't get to control that. And the amount of water you get drives how much fertilizer is profitable to use and how much yield you can attain. So I think we need to start looking at our fertilizer programs differently, and it's definitely something we're doing. We're still in an area that farms and puts out a lot of their fertility in the fall before they have any idea of what that next year is going to do. And that's not a very good way of managing your fertilizer dollars. It's not a very good way of managing the risk on your farm, and it's not very good for the environment. So, I think there's some basics out there that we can still do. And Canada is a big proponent of 4 R's, and I get that, but one of the R's is right time. And yet the right time thing, I don't think we're always hitting right on the head.
I want to ask the three of you in closing. We like to do this with our Friday roundtables as we wrap up our weeks. Is to ask you for something, a storyline, a concept, an observation to leave the audience thinking about something in this context that has to do with food and farming. Marc, as mentioned, you do great work with Canada's National Observer. I want to encourage people to follow you on Twitter at Fawcett-Atkinson. And, of course, they can find your contact information and a link to your work in the show notes on YouTube and with the podcast. See, I'm spinning my tires to buy you about 10 seconds to think of something brilliant to say. I wanted to give a little preamble there to give you something to think about. What's one story that you're following? What's one thing that this engaged audience should be considering as they think about food and where it comes from after hearing this interview?
Climate change is definitely for me that's looking both in terms of what are the impacts, how are we thinking about essentially like how much more unpredictable is the weather going to be, and what kind of impact is that going to have on crops both here and in the States, where we're also bringing a lot of food in from, and then how are farmers adapting to that essentially. That's big. And then also disinformation is another big one that I definitely have my eye on around food.
And when you disinformation, I mean, that's I appreciate you saying that. We just had that conversation with Supriya Dwivedi about just the College of Surgeons and Physicians in Ontario. People are hanging bags of shit on their door and threatening their staff with they actually shot out a window, was shot out with shells. Like, I mean, it's out of control. And they say that this is not shells, you know what I'm saying. But the point is, they say they're like, this is driven by disinformation. That's impacting healthcare workers. It's been a rampant problem. Disinformation is a problem in politics around elections. I mean, it's a real crisis. What specifically, when you say in the context of food, you mentioned the idea about the fertilizer ban. What's one other area maybe where you're seeing disinformation really prevalent?
Essentially, it's anything. What I've seen is anything related to sustainability initiatives is where it's really coming up. Those are definitely the biggest, and to some degree food prices as well. We talked about that a bit at the beginning. That's a different form, I'd say, of disinfo. It's not as might be erroneous, but it's not malicious in quite the same way. But
I don't know
check your sources.
Check your sources. No kidding. And understand what is a good source. We've been talking about how they need to be teaching kids this in junior high and high school. How do you recognize a good source, and where should you see red flags? I want to criticize myself as host here for a second, because I'm not sure we've 100% nailed down. Like, if the average person listens to this roundtable and says, but I'm still not sure with that famous photo of the two $37 chicken breasts at the journalist posted in Ontario, or maybe it was Quebec. I think it was Ontario. The 37, like, when it all comes down to it, Jeff, who's getting rich? Like, who is it? Like, because if it's not the producers, and if it's not we've seen record profits at the grocery store, but it's not that simple. Is it? I mean, people would revolt. People would lose their minds. At least one grocery chain would drop their prices and steal all the business. So, like, I just want to make sure we don't wrap this conversation before understanding who's getting rich.
Yeah, where's the money going? That's across the board. Where, like, fuel prices are up. Where are those dollars going? In the case of beef, it's pretty clearly the packers and whatever's happening at retail. I just got a list of prices that came across. So, I guess to the agricultural side of things, there is, and that's the criticism, like, there is extreme wealth. Farms are handling piles of equity and a lot of wealth. The return on that investment is, as much as that's easy to say and feeds that narrative, the return on that investment is very dangerous, and very few bankers and almost zero investors will look at agriculture as an opportunity. So that's telling two very different stories when it comes to what that wealth is. But being able to pay for land and being able to pay for combines that used to be 600,000 and now they're 1.2 million, that's where the dollars are going. Look at the share price of John Deere. You want to make money, never mind Tesla, go into those kinds of stocks. So you have to follow it all the way through, I guess, is what I'm saying on that front.
Whoa! Deere and Company shares are trading at $410 a share.
You're pretty fast on the trigger.
Yeah.
And that's up, they're all selling less equipment at a higher price and a higher margin. And it's not just John Deere, it is across, and there's a lack of competition. Like, it was literally this spring trying to buy a tractor. Every 2 weeks, the salesman was calling me saying, hey, if you don't make this deal now, the price is going up 8%. And I was furious, frustrated, pissed off. on a daily basis. It was bonkers. So that's what we're up against. And at the end of the day, I guess consumers can look at it and go, look at this fancy $1 million tractor or combine or whatever this farmer's driving, but that then needs to be paid for, and that comes into the price of food, whether it's commodity price things, which we have zero control over, and the price of wheat and barley and canola is traded on exchanges in New York and Chicago and around the world, and how that impacts pricing. I guess what jumped to my mind immediately is consumers that want to maybe breathe a sigh of relief and understand it a little bit better, engage with agriculture. There's farms out there and there's movements out there in the summer with open farm days. And honestly, this Saturday, I'm putting some time aside if people want to come out to the farm and visit, and I'll tour the calf barn and have those conversations and understand everything we are doing to create some optimism in that we're doing our part and reconnect so that there's a basic understanding.
Oh, I love that. I love that you guys do that. We let the audience know that Jeff and Coralie Nonay own and operate Lakeside Dairy we're talking about, but you can check out their operation at lakesidefarmstead.com. The cheese is phenomenal. The Nonay beef is the best in Alberta, and I love that you're more than happy to open your doors and tour people around. And there's nothing like being in a calf barn. It's the coolest. And I remember our little guy Wyatt, when he was 3, we took him out to the family barns and the calves. A couple calves had just been born, and it's just a really special experience for the kids. I'm blown away looking at this. I'm so glad that you put the John Deere share price on our radar. You know that in February, March of 2020, it was trading at like $110. It's at $410 now. On average, up $240 over the past 5 years. That is wild. What's the coolest thing in a $1.2 million combine? I mean, they pretty much drive themselves. What's the coolest thing in a combine?
They get the technology of what you can see, but they do the same job they did when they were 600,000.
Do they at least have massaging seats, or is there a pedicure thing that your feet get done while you're driving around?
I'd love to say they drive themselves and there's a movie screen on the left and you just kind of sit there and relax and enjoy the day, but it's not quite that. And if you're not paying attention, the repair bill is equally as impressive as the price tag.
And you can't fix them yourself now, right? That's a big controversy.
Well, that's actually shifted too. That's a whole nother topic. They found out that maybe they don't have enough mechanics, so they're actually saying we'd prefer you to fix it yourself if you can at all do that. Yeah, it's a weird world.
Okay, it's like the airlines. They just don't have the staff, and sorry for any inconvenience. You're going to have to go this yourself. Steele, we've already kept you all 15 minutes past what we asked for. I'm so grateful for it. Last word to you. Something that you'd like this audience to be thinking about in the context of food and farming.
I would say that the carbon tax is an opportunity for farmers. The carbon market will be driven by the carbon tax. The higher that price goes, the more value that can be created at the farm level from those offset credits. But for that to happen, we need to have a framework in place so we know how to operate. And right now, that's just not happening. And I think mostly what's holding that up is the farm lobby groups, because we don't quite see the opportunity that's right in front of us, and we're more worried about some small costs getting added on instead of the big opportunity that's on the other side. And man, I hope we don't miss this opportunity, because I think it could be really great for the industry and really turn this profitability problem that we're seeing without really having to drive food prices higher.
The three of you took some pretty high-level stuff. We could have been inside baseball, but you made it accessible and understandable to a civilian audience, which I'm so grateful for. That was Steele Perrett and Jeff Nonay, both checking in from Lakeside Dairy. You can check out lakesidefarmstead.com. And, of course, it's great to have as well Marc Fawcett-Atkinson making his Real Talk debut. You can find him on Twitter and, of course, read his great work at nationalobserver.com. That's Canada's National Observer. To the three of you, thanks for what you do, informing us, feeding us, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
You bet. That was fantastic.
It was fantastic.
What's one thing you took away from that?
Well, the Steele right at the end there, because, people are always complaining that, carbon tax is hurting farmers, and he says they can utilize it and it can help them. It just has to be done in the right way. So
people don't like
love
change, right?
No.
And people don't like added cost, to state the obvious. And so you get that pushback, but I've really never heard somebody that works in ag, like you want to question his credentials, really?
Yeah.
Right? that works in ag say, what are you guys bitching about? There's a huge opportunity here.
Yeah, for credits.
Fantastic.
That's a clip.
That's
right
great.
there. We're done.
The Real Talk, it's going to be easy to pull the highlights this day. Of course, you can always follow Real Talk across your social media platforms. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, and we're on Twitter at Real Talk RJ. That's where we push out our highlight clips, and of course, you can find everything by way of our website as well. The Real Talk Roundtable is proudly presented every Friday by our great friends at Urban Timber Reclaimed Wood. They're the ones that did this beautiful studio table for us, but I want to talk to you today about their reclaimed flooring at urbantimber.ca. You can check this out. Everyone loves a good comeback story. When your feet hit the ground every morning on your Urban Timber Reclaimed solid wood flooring, you'll wake up walking on history. The wood is reclaimed from buildings, barns, warehouses that helped build our great country. Bring a piece of history home with Urban Timber's Reclaimed Flooring Collection. You can check out the portfolio. Look at some of these stunning photos. These are installations they've done. They are game changers. Of course, you can see them online at urbantimber.ca or go see them in their brand new Edmonton showroom. It's open every Saturday. I mean, there's nothing like actually seeing these masterpieces in person. They also do wood siding. They do coffee tables, all kinds of cool stuff. Again, the website is urbantimber.ca. At Friesen Brothers, they know that really great food is the starting point for family time around the table that, of course, everybody values. Friesen Brothers has been operating on that principle for more than 65 years. And they've got easy family meal solutions for those of you that are finding that time crunch makes putting good quality food around that dinner table tougher than ever. Find your favorite recipe inspiration with affordability and nutrition in mind by visiting them online today at Friesen.com. And if you're visiting a Friesen Brothers this weekend, my personal recommendation, the Ivan's sausage and the sourdough cinnamon buns, you will not regret your visit to Friesen Brothers. Our friends at Eden Landscaping want to remind you that they've got more than 20 years of experience with custom landscape designs. Why not bring your outdoor space to life like hundreds of families have, utilizing Mike and his team, the one-stop shop for landscape design and, of course, the build itself. Maybe you're looking at putting new lighting features in. Maybe you've been dreaming about a water feature. Hey, one of those koi ponds, Johnny? What about an outdoor kitchen? Everybody's getting into the outdoor pizza oven game. They're experts in all of this at Eden Landscaping. You can check out their portfolio and make contact with them today at landscapeedmonton.ca. And for those of you that were, of course, inspired by all the talk around cost, you're tuning into these Real Talk roundtables to figure out how you can tighten up the purse strings and stretch your dollars further, go to parkpower.ca right now. Everybody uses internet. Everybody needs electricity and natural gas, but not everybody takes the 2 minutes to figure out how they could pay less. It takes just a second or two to compare rates, what you're paying now and what you would be paying with Park Power. And don't forget, the new bundling incentive for fans of Real Talk is simple. You use the promo code RealTalk23, that's RealTalk23, and for every service you bundle, electricity, natural gas, and internet, you'll save $50 off your first bill. That's $150 on the table, ready to be claimed when you take your business to the friendly local utilities provider, Park Power. I'm thinking that this might be a great weekend to hit up the Dairy Queen special. We want to remind our friends as well, the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. I threw you for a loop there, Johnny. That one was on me. I just wanted to remind everybody that as January, we're about a week away from the end of January. That means we're about a week away from the end of the buy one, get one free special at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount. That's my home location. And of course, out in Sherwood Park, the recently renovated beautiful location on Baseline Road. A 6-pack of dilly bars or DQ sandwiches becomes 12 when you mention Real Talk. Buy one box of these popular frozen treats, and the second box is absolutely free.
Woo!
Didn't Didn't really hear any bitching from you this week, Johnny. You've been Captain Positivity. You've been bringing a smile and positive energy to the studio every day this week. No. People should know that you, by and large, are one of the most positive and optimistic people that I've ever met, let alone worked with. Did you have anything that you wanted to put out into the environment or into the atmosphere here as we get into trash talk? Is there anything grinding your gears this week?
No, I think we've talked about it all. I kind of want to forget about this week. There was a lot of crap going on, so I just kind of want to have a good weekend. I want to have some fun. I'm going out. I'm doing a couple big events around the city, so I'll see you kids out there.
Attaboy. Yeah, you can check out Johnny. You have a website, or how do people get in touch with you? What is it, JohnnyInfamous.com or something?
I think I have it right. Where is it?
I'm putting you on the spot here. Yeah, but you're going to be, look at that.
Entertainment.
Hey, there you go. InfamousEntertainment.ca. Yeah, you can check that out. I love it. That Provorov thing, that really resonated with you. Can I get personally? That really, I got under your skin. I really got under your skin.
It's not his deal. Like, who cares? Like, if you're going to be a homophobe, if you're going to be, whatever you want to do it. And it's better to know who those people are. But what bothers me is the buying of the jerseys and the people who chime in and the people who jump on and the people who prop these people up who are going against the flow of the river of change that we're trying to get to. Like, let's just get to a place where everyone can do what they want, be who they want to be, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
Live how you want to do. Love who you want to love. And,
Yeah. That was kind of the one that, and people are free to do what they want. And a lot of times it's like, we got to pick and choose what we're going to get super pissed off about.
Mm-hmm. And I don't like it's not like throw the guy in jail or whatever, but obviously these views, we need more change so that people like him can come to an understanding and be like, hey, maybe I shouldn't do shit like this.
The one thing that I was kind of like, really, was the Provorov jerseys selling out. Like, that to me is like, really, that's kind of annoying. And I know that's a big win for all the people that, anyway, you know who you are. You're not listening to this show anyway. Every Friday, they're hate listening. They hate listening to the show.
They're listening.
Then they write in and let us know what idiots we are. Sure. Yeah, what idiots they think we are anyway. Every Friday, our friends at Local Environmental Services give us an opportunity. You can check them out online, localenvironmental.ca. Just wonderful friends of the show because they provided a platform. They poured the foundation. The very first week that Real Talk ever put out a show, they said it's important for people to be able to have a little bit of fun, but say what they need to say and make sure that message is heard. And that's why they established this tradition we call Trash Talk. Yeah, that's right. This one from Leonard, and I hope Leonard feels better after sending this in. Leonard, we hope that you weren't texting and driving while you sent us this. Leonard says, hey, you, yeah, listening to the Real Talk podcast while you're driving 10 kilometers an hour below the speed limit in the passing lane. Yeah, you, just move over. Just over to the right. Just move over. He says, check your mirror every once in a while. See me behind you and just move over. Leonard says, you can't possibly, never mind. Just move over. That's from Leonard. We hope that it worked, Leonard. We hope you're feeling better. How about this one from Rob, who chimes in on Preston Manning's new appointment? A citizen-led panel on government COVID response. Rob says, forgive me for my bluntness here, but this patronage appointment to lead a panel where Mr. Manning is paid approximately $250,000 is a farce. Did the government actually think that this passed the smell test? I understand that Manning is and remains the golden boy for many in Alberta's conservative circles, but the stench coming off of this decision is ridiculous. Had this been the federal Liberals, UCP caucus and cabinet would be incensed. He says, I greatly encourage the UCP caucus and cabinet ministers to walk this back. The old Tory pork is sometimes hard to pass up. Old Tory Pork. What a band name. I am naming my band Old Tory Pork. And then the album's going to be called Bring Home the Bacon. Rob says, the Tory pork sometimes hard to pass up, but we taxpayers, we've had enough. My taxes, insurance, food, energy, and everything else is going up in cost. Yet a long-time conservative bagman gets a golden handshake. Walk it back! That from Rob. And this one from Mark, who says, in the mail the other day, I received a Help is on the Way card from the government of Alberta. reading the card. One could get angrier and angrier reading this plan the government has for basically reversing earlier healthcare decisions. Even the useless point of mailing a professionally colored card with pictures could have one ranting about the wasted cost of this type of communication. What I think we need to be focusing on is what the message and the things not said. And two things really stood out for me. Number one, attracting and training doctors and nurses and leveraging publicly funded surgeries at private clinics. Can Albertans connect the lines of attract and train to the line of reduced funding for post-secondary institutions by these same conservative governments? Becoming a nurse or a doctor requires extraordinary marks, and the available spots are fewer and fewer. A lot of students have great marks, can't even get into programs, so they're moving away to other provinces or countries, and we're losing them to those locations. And also, wonders Mark, do Albertans understand the implications of public funding at private facilities? Mark and I might not agree, but that's totally fine. He says it's important to mention that theme within the health department, right? Underfunding necessary infrastructure to keep up with the current rate of population and demographics was part of the long-term goal of introducing private clinics to take the strain off the public system. The result, making people wait in pain and fear for essential surgery that sadly some didn't survive to get. This is a travesty of morality where political dogma is more important than human life. The outcome appears to be we're ending up with a constant shortage of doctors and nurses that will have to start buying more health insurance to cover extra costs. The public purse will eventually pay only so much, and then what? We can deserve better health care, but there's only one solution left. What? Private clinics? Taking away from the public purse? I hope we can find a solution to the predicament we're in. Mark then leaves a personal note encouraging me to consider this as subject matter for an upcoming Real Talk Roundtable presented by Urban Timber. You bet your bacon, buddy. We're on it. You can send us a trash talk to talk@ryanjesperson.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Keep it on the rails this weekend, everybody, and we'll see you back here Monday on Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.